Tonight, the prisons crisis in England and Wales. More than 1,000 inmates are let out early as the government announces a major review into the whole system. We'll take you inside one prison in Kent to show you how bad things have got and tell you what the government says it's going to do to deal with the issue long term. We're told the plan is to get smart, but is the money there for real reform? I'll be joined live by the Justice Minister, Heidi Alexander. Also tonight, calls for the law to be changed to give police who fire fatal shots the benefit of the doubt after a firearms officer was cleared of murdering Chris Kaba. Plus, I'll be joined live by the mother of a British-Egyptian political prisoner who's gone on hunger strike and is urging the Foreign Secretary to act. And after the Chancellor's hair makes headlines again this morning, we'll talk political presentation. All that and much more with Jim Murphy and Richard Tice, who'll be with me for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Ali Fortescue live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, welcome to the Politics Hub. You've probably noticed Sophie's not here this week, so it's going to be me with you for the next few days. And this evening, we're going to start with the Ministry of Justice, a department that at times has appeared marginalised. Over the years, a target for budget cuts. The government inherited a genuine crisis in prisons in England and Wales. Today, more than 1,000 more prisoners are being released early because of overcrowding. And this time, it's people who had sentences of more than 5 years. So that's more serious crimes. That is the immediate crisis the government are dealing with. The bigger question being asked today as they launch a major review is, does prison actually work? Can people be detained in other ways at home? Or should the whole system be built more around rehabilitation than retribution? Well, in a moment, we're going to speak to a Justice Minister, but let's just go through some of the numbers in more detail quickly. As part of this prison's release, I should say the prison's population was more than £87,000. That's the latest figure this week, and that leaves just 2,000 spaces free. That's the operational capacity there. Today, about 1,100 inmates have been released early. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Malone, who saw the pressure inside one prison for herself and has tonight's top story.
HMP Ford in Sussex, releasing inmates early in order to free up space across an overcrowded prison estate. This man was one of 1,100 freed today. He was serving time for drug offences and is determined not to go back.
What's the mood inside jail?
Well, it's a positive mood, yeah, everyone's going home, so everyone's happy.
Are you confident you're going to stay out?
I'm 100% staying out.
He'd been released after serving 40% of his sentence.
It should be 20%. I think people should be in prison for less time, a lot less time.
Why do you think that?
Because they want to go home.
The people freed early today were sentenced to more than 5 years, longer jail terms than those released last month.
Do you think it's right that people are being let out early?
Well, if it helps the situation, then yeah.
The government think it will help the situation. We filmed inside HMP Elmley in Kent, a prison that's been operating at almost 100% capacity.
Just so busy.
And even though we were escorted by experienced staff, you could feel the tension.
So the prisoner there was just presenting himself with scars on his body, and he said this is what prison does, self-harm.
Tight conditions here are having an impact. All of it fueling friction. And for staff, they're feeling it.
What's a bad day like? Could be anything. Could be fighting a fire, could be giving CPR, could be stopping a giant fight, a near-on riot, could be anything. Some days you come in and you've got all of that in one day, some days you've got none of it.
That might not be surprising to the government or the opposition, but still, hearing from staff inside, a reminder for those on the outside about how much pressure our prisons are under.
We saw a very powerful package on Sky News this morning highlighting this.
And so the government are releasing people to ease overcrowding, but a commitment too to reviewing sentencing policy.
This government believes in prison, but we must also increase the use of punishment outside of prison too.
A move welcomed by this governor.
I would love to see no custodial sentences under 12 months. I think if you could have the resource in the community to really deliver powerful community sentences, that has the power to really support true change in a way that is a lot cheaper for taxpayers.
The time we spent in prison was just a snapshot. Not the worst day they'd seen, but not without incident either. All of it reflective of a prison system that's spent months in crisis. And they're not out of it yet. Molly Malone, Sky News.
Molly Malone reporting there. Well, part of the problem might be the churn that we've seen in Justice Secretaries in recent years. And I actually just want to show you something because I think this is quite a kind of stark picture. If we look back, these are the last 12 Justice Secretaries, right back since Ken Clarke all those years ago, Chris Grayling, Michael Gove, some very familiar faces, Michael Gove, Liz Truss. Quite often it is quite high-profile people that get this job and go on to do what is perceived to be a bigger job in government. We've had 10 different Justice Secretaries in the last 10 years. There are about 4 in the space of 2 years around here. Dominic Raab, of course, Justice Secretary twice. There he is. So we have seen a pretty extraordinary churn when it comes to Justice Secretaries. I should also say David Gauke, who is part of this review that's been happening today. Well, you heard there from Molly Malone. She can join us live now from London. Molly Malone, this is about what's happening today with prisoners being released early, but it's also about the future. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's right. The government were clear that today's big set of mass releases was the second, and they say the final set of early releases, those people being released having served 40% of their sentence. Previously, the automatic release point policy was having released them at 50% of their sentence. And as you say, these people that were released from prison today for more serious offences, they were sentenced to 5 years or more in prison. The government, though, clear that this was a temporary emergency measure, but there really are a series of challenges that still face them. One really is the here and the now. Will this early release policy work, or will some of these people perhaps be released homeless without accommodation, then forced perhaps to break their licence conditions, perhaps go on to re-offend and then get recalled back to prison? We already have a massive recall rate calling back prisoners to prison. Will this potentially add to them? They need the policy to work if it's actually going to be effective in reducing overcrowding and keeping people out of prison. The second, though, as you say, was all about kind of strategy. We heard lots of different measures today, the kind of short-term measure being those emergency release schemes, home detention curfew, increasing the use of the tagging system rather than keeping people in prison. But the medium to kind of long-term, this sentencing review, they've appointed David Gauke, former Conservative Justice Secretary. He's famous for thinking really that we should abolish certain sentences, short-term sentences, certain sentences below 6 months. And they talked, the Justice Secretary today in the Commons, about one, prison working, this being a government committed to prison working, but also in the next breath saying that they want to look to alternatives to prison and looking at solutions perhaps outside of prison. And to do that, they've launched the sentencing review. But in the same breath, she's talking about introducing and increasing 14,000 extra prison spaces. That policy fundamentally, the Prisons Minister, James Timpson, he disagrees with it. He thinks that a third of prisoners shouldn't be there, and actually much more effective is, as you say, rehabilitating them, seeing them outside of prison. So many tensions in this policy, lots to consider, and yet the reality is that right now the government is still grappling with an overcrowding crisis and the immediacy of that right now. And so yes, they can think about the sentencing review. They've said that they want to throw ahead to March. That's quite a quick sentencing review as policies kind of go, having that done by the spring. But still, day by day, they're seeing recalls. They're seeing the prison population crisis still ballooning. So it's about that balancing act between prison working, the long term, the short term and the medium term. All of it they're grappling with.
OK, Molly Malone, thanks so much. I'm pleased to say we're joined now by the Justice Minister, Heidi Alexander. Thank you. Busy day for you. And let's start on the immediate crisis. prisons overcrowding, people being released a day, more than 1,000. The expectation is that prisons could fill up again within months. Is that right?
Well, we had a dire inheritance and the Justice Secretary had to take a very difficult decision in the first couple of weeks of taking office to reduce the automatic release point for some people on standard determinate sentences from 50% to 40% in order to free up capacity in our prisons. When we experienced the disorder in the summer, obviously that has increased people going into our prisons. And so we don't expect to run out of space until the summer of next year. But what you will have heard the Justice Secretary announce today was not only the sentencing review, so that for the longer term, we've got some sensible solutions in place, but also a number of bridging measures in relation to home detention curfew, the risk-assessed recall review, in order to ensure that whenever anyone is given a custodial sentence, that there is a prison place waiting for them.
OK, I accept that you inherited a very difficult situation. I just want to play you a clip that I think lays bare the kind of consequences of this. This is Ellie, we're calling her Ellie. She's a mother of a baby who was shaken, who had life-changing injuries. The perpetrator is due to be released early next year. And here's what she had to say.
If you were to have a meeting tomorrow, what would you say?
If I had a meeting with the government tomorrow, I'd give them half an hour of my little boy and say to them, this is the person, this perpetrator did this to my little boy, and you're trying to release him early. Just walk a day in my shoes. And then say that your policy applies to us.
It's obviously really difficult to listen to. You've said, and I quote, that the policy has robust exclusions, which includes all offences of serious violence. What would you say to Ellie?
I understand how distressing the release of this individual will be for Ellie and people like her. The exclusions that we put in place in July were very robust. So we excluded anyone that has committed a sexual offence, anyone who has committed terrorism offences, violent offences which attract a sentence, violent offences which attract a sentence of more than 4 years, and a whole range of domestic abuse related offences, things like stalking, non-fatal strangulation. In order to pass this legislation quickly, we had to look at offence types as opposed to offenders. But I do understand this will be distressing for victims. That's also why we gave the probation service time to plan so that victims could be notified, because whilst people are coming out of prison perhaps a few weeks or months before they otherwise would have been, whilst that might sound like a small amount of time, for victims this is a big thing, and it's really important that the appropriate notifications could happen. Under the previous government's early release scheme, which was called the End of Custody Supervised Licence scheme, that planning wasn't possible. It was chaotic. And so it's really important for victims that we have appropriate mechanisms in place to communicate, but also really important for victims that prison places are there for people when these really serious crimes are committed. And the situation that we inherited in July was so dire that we were one bad day away from the prisons totally overflowing. And if that happened, courts wouldn't have been able to hear trials and the police would have had to stop arresting. That is never a situation that any government should have to countenance. And so we had to take this really, really difficult decision that we did back in July.
You're looking at longer term reform too. Do you think there should be more of a focus on rehabilitation rather than retribution?
So in the UK, in England and Wales, we've got the highest incarceration rate in Western Europe. 8 out of 10 offenders are re-offenders. So it is not working at the moment.
Prison's not working.
Prison at the moment is not working. And I'm not prepared to sit on this programme and defend the status quo where our prisons are overflowing. We've got the highest incarceration rate in Europe and we've got high levels of reoffending. And so we do have to look at how we enable people to turn their back on a life of crime. And one of the things we've also talked about today is how we expand the use of punishment outside of prisons. Yeah. So things like home arrest, in effect, home detention curfew, electronic monitoring, tagging, surveillance, because actually with the evolution of technology...
I want to ask about this. Sorry, there's something that was quite interesting that I was hearing about this morning, this watch that can monitor how much... Is it a watch that monitors how much you're drinking? Can you just explain this to me? Yeah, so there's an alcohol tag, in effect, which every 30 minutes measures your sweat and can detect whether there is alcohol in your sweat or not. Look, to be honest, in our prisons at the moment, drinkers can get alcohol on some occasions. And so this is, a really quite an intrusive device. Well, I don't think alcohol or drugs should be available in our prisons, but sadly, that's the dire situation that we inherited. And so if you have one of these compliance devices, then it monitors your sweat every 30 seconds. And actually, there's 97% compliance. Other things you can have is, where a device, if you have been set an exclusion zone or a curfew where you are not allowed to enter a particular area or leave your home at a particular time, you could actually have devices which trigger perhaps someone giving you a ring at that point. We want to look at international best practice so that we can make sure that we are using the best technology so that we can look at sentences where an individual's freedom and liberties are seriously curtailed, but where, they are still not in prison, in the community. But that has to be, a really robust response. Polling suggests that public think sentences are too lenient, but it sounds like that's, you don't agree with the public on that.
So what we have said in the sentencing review is we've asked David Gauke, who is a well-respected former Conservative Lord Chancellor, to actually look at how we reform sentencing going forward. It might be that for some offenders, the most prolific offenders who are committing more and more serious crime, it might be that a longer custodial sentence is appropriate in that situation. But we do know that short sentences often result in people leaving prison, committing crime again, going back into prison.
So you want to move away from short sentences?
Well,
that's the kind of nub of it.
Actually, what we need to look at is what works and what's most effective. So someone, for example, who is released and is placed on house arrest, home detention curfew, is half as likely to reoffend as if you were really released normally. And so I think the British public want to see a situation where for serious offences, the most dangerous offenders, prison will always be the answer. But we've got to be smarter in who we are sending to prison, and we've got to tackle this reoffending issue, because if we don't do that, we're just going to be kept in this perpetual cycle.
And just really briefly, it was widely reported that Shabana Mahmood was not happy last week with the budget, the way the budget was initially presented to her. It's now been agreed. Are you happy with what you're going to get from the budget? Is enough money going into justice?
Ali, forgive me, I'm not going to get drawn onto what the Chancellor is going to stand up and say next week.
But do you think this is a department that's been traditionally forgotten and that needs more money?
I think certainly under the Conservatives, the criminal justice system was often overlooked and neglected. And
so you're happy with...
I know that there have been some really important negotiations, and I'm very happy to come back into your studio and talk to you again once the Chancellor has stood up and delivered the budget next week.
Please do. We'll take you up on that. Thank you so much, Heidi Alexander, Justice Minister, speaking to us this evening. Thank you. And that story is sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the CEO of Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace, and the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Shoda. Well, let's bring in our panel, shall we? The former leader of the Scottish Labour Party, Jim Murphy, and Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice. Thank you both so much for joining us. Jim, what did you think of what we heard there from the Minister?
I think she was clear that people have to be punished. We can't have a system where people aren't punished. I think that a different way to look at the argument the government's making today is that the prisons estate is emblematic of a deeper problem in our country, which is there's not been long-term planning. And a specific way of looking at this that the public will absolutely grasp. If the prisons are full, no more people can be convicted to go into the prisons, and therefore the police can't arrest those criminals to put them through a process. So if you put more people into the system, some people have to come out. Now, in the medium term, you've got to build more prisons. The country doesn't have enough prisons, and the ones that we do have aren't effective enough at rehabilitation. So this is a longer-term problem. There's no way on earth the government would want to be doing the things that it's doing today. It wants to build more prisons, but you can't build a garden shed in the time that they've been in power. So you certainly can't build a prison, and that's the problem they have.
I've actually challenged. I've challenged the Justice Secretary because we've got about 10,000 foreign criminals in our prisons today. Actually, they could all be taken out and deported from where they came, which is what happens to them when they finish their sentence. So those are the people.
About deportations today, didn't you?
We're not interested in talk. We want action, and we don't want to release bad people back into society when there's a much better, faster solution that would have greater support from the British public and would save the taxpayer billions of pounds. That's the quick thing that should be done. And then actually, I think, Jim is right. The population's grown by 8-9 million in the last 15 years. So therefore, you've got to build infrastructure across hospitals and prison places accordingly. And that long-term planning hasn't happened. I think that the challenge for the government now will be, it's right, you want to take bad people off the streets, but you want to stop reoffending. So there's got to be a proper rehabilitation programme for people in prisons. That's all about competence, implementation. If they achieve that, then they'll get the respect of the British people. But short term, there is a much better solution.
Sentences have got tougher and tougher, though.
They have, and look, David Gauke will do his review. All I would say to Richard, I quite like being on this programme because you don't do yaboo politics, and I think that's quite a nice culture in this programme.
Definitely don't do yaboo.
But I just want to say to Richard, is that if, as you suggest, we forcibly remove all foreign prisoners in our system, I think the quid pro quo from all those countries is we would be expected to take back all of our nationals in their prisons. So it's not as simplistic and easy an answer as budget saving as Richard suggests. Well, I think it's much more complicated.
My understanding is the numbers are...
how many foreign prisoners? How many British?
It's a lot less than the 10,000 plus we've got here.
But it feels like this kind of lock them up, throw away the key. That's been the narrative for a long time. Because I mean, do you think that's the right approach?
But actually, the truth is, that's a publicity spin, but that's not the reality. The reality is people serve about 50% of their sentence and then they're let out. And I think that causes a crisis of confidence amongst the British people. We want competence. So yes, people must serve their time. They must be punished.
But should there be
during
more focus on rehabilitation?
During that period, yes, in prison, have a greater focus on rehabilitation. I know a charity that's really good in employing people when they leave prison in a variety of industries called Tempest Nova. They focus on that. Really good stuff. We need a lot more of that sort of successful work.
I think one of the places that I would like to see the government be quite imaginative is in the imprisonment of mothers. Now, this isn't to give people mums a free pass at all, but the impact of imprisoning a mother for a relatively insubstantial crime, all crimes are serious, but not the serious offences, it can lead to family collapse and the children going into care if there isn't an extended family. So I hope that David Gauke's review looks in particular at the impact of imprisoning mums of particularly young children and the collapse that leads to in the family structure.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Thank you both. We will come back to you very shortly. You're watching the Politics Hub coming up. With the autumn statement just over a week away, the headlines are full of speculation about possible tax rises, threshold freezes and the colour of the Chancellor's hair. Yes, as the tabloids focus on Rachel Reeves' Barnett, we'll be looking at political makeovers. Police say Chris Kaba was a dangerous gangster directly linked to 2 shootings in the days before he was killed by a firearms officer. We'll have the story.
This nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom.
Drop one bomb.
Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Tear down this wall.
Our very freedom came under attack.
We are the change that we seek.
It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president.
Make America great again.
This is a country of possibilities. There have been 46 presidents of the United States. Who will be next? Get the full story first on Sky News.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours, and we're going to take it back.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power. Now, freedom! There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes, torrential rain and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued with its ultimatum to the people of Ashkelon, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in.
Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous.
We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now to the Chris Kaba case, and we can report tonight that police believed him to be a core member of one of London's most dangerous gangs, directly linked by detectives to two shootings in the week before his death. The details of his background couldn't be reported until today because of restrictions put in place by a judge. Here's Sky's crime correspondent, Martin Brandt.
Minutes before the shooting, on their way into the nightclub, the red arrow shows the victim. The blue arrow is the alleged gunman Chris Kaba. It was the week before Kaba's death. In the packed bar, Kaba pushes his way through the crowds towards the victim. He opens fire. The victim, hit in the leg, manages to run. Chris Kaba calmly puts the gun in his bag and, in the chaos, strides out. Only then does he start to run, chasing the victim and shooting him a second time. In the wake of the shooting, the nightclub was closed down.
If he'd lived, Chris Kaba would have been charged with attempted murder for the shooting here. And police were also planning to put a gang injunction on him to restrict his activities as someone involved in gang violence.
Oh, police!
Chris Kaba was shot dead by a police marksman 6 days later.
Standing by for strike, stand by, stand by.
He was driving a vehicle linked to a shooting the night before. The firearms officer, Martin Blake, was cleared of murder. His acquittal prompted much criticism of the decision to charge the officer, not least from a colleague of his who was there on the night.
Martin was acting entirely in good faith in order to protect his colleagues and in doing so more broadly to protect members of the public. So I think for many firearms officers it's a confusing situation they find themselves in, that it's actually the public who will suffer from this. The public are less safe when we create a culture where our police officers are neither valued nor treated fairly. And I think for all of us within the policing community particularly, but for those members of the public who have an interest in this too, I think we should all be very concerned.
And in a statement, the Met Police Federation criticised the police watchdog, the IOPC. It remains a matter of grave concern, said the Federation, that investigations into the most serious, complex and dynamic operational scenarios such as this are carried out by those who seemingly have little or no experience of policing.
Show me your hands!
The Met Commissioner has called for more legal protection for officers who use lethal force. Not everyone agrees.
I'm not in favour of there being a different justice system for the police. It's been suggested today by some people that we should have a sort of court-martial system. Our police officers are not soldiers. They're citizens in uniform, as we've always believed. They're subject to the same law as us, and I think that should be the situation. Otherwise, I think there's a real risk if there was a special system of justice for police officers who'd shot people. That would strongly weaken, very much weaken public confidence.
Details of Chris Kaba's past had been kept from the jury, but revealed the day after the verdict. This was Kaba, his rap name Mad Itch, said to be a core member of the 6-7 gang in South London and allegedly its principal gunman. His family had hoped to keep details of his gang connections hidden until a potential inquest. They did not respond to the revelations. Martin Brunt, Sky News.
Well, earlier today, peers debated an urgent question on the Chris Kaba case. Former head of the Metropolitan Police, Lord Hogan Howe, called for firearms officers to receive the benefit of the doubt in cases like this. Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is with me now. John, tell us a bit about what was happening in the Commons, in the Lords today.
It was indeed a question from Lord Hogan Howe, a former Metropolitan Police Commissioner. There's a few of those in the House of Lords these days, and a few quite senior policemen who also got involved today. The question from Lord Hogan Howe to the Home Office Minister, Lord Hanson, was what steps are the government taking, are planning to take to review the legal position of firearms officers?
Police officers are very few who carry firearms. There are 67 million people in this country, but only around 3,000 who on our behalf are volunteers who will go forward to face someone who is armed or otherwise so dangerous. They're paid no more for taking that awful responsibility. They do not go to work each day to kill anyone. And it does seem as though the system doesn't give them the benefit of doubt that was given by the jury in this case.
So the benefit of the doubt Lord Hogan Howe is calling for. Now, there were other suggestions, as we've heard from, we heard in Martin's report, the suggestion of a court-martial sort of system. That came from Brian Paddick, a former Met commander, a Liberal Democrat peer these days. There were suggestions, perhaps, of anonymity for police officers in these circumstances. A lot of complaints about how long these cases are taking to come to court. Now, what we got from Lord Hanson, the Home Office Minister, was very much a holding statement, because he said that Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, is going to make a statement on this. He said in the coming days. That could come tomorrow. He talked about how she was reviewing this urgently. He also revealed that, you remember last night I said that a year or so ago, Suella Braverman launched a review of this whole procedure. That was when the officer today who acquitted yesterday was charged. Now, the government is looking at that review of Suella Braverman's. And so it may well be that some of the proposals the Tories were going to bring in may be brought in by Yvette Cooper. But clearly, there's a lot of police chiefs that are very unhappy about this whole procedure, the fact that the trauma of this case. But the government is promising some action, but they're under a lot of pressure to act quickly.
Really interesting. Thank you, John. Well, it is an issue, as he was suggesting. There's also been a talking point in the Tory leadership contest, with Robert Jenrick speaking out on the issue yesterday. And on the issue of that context and what happens next to the Tory party, we're going to be hearing from Grant Shapps, the former party chair. But before that, let's bring our panel back in for tonight, shall we, Jim and Richard? Richard, I guess, this new information that we now have about Chris Kaba, none of that was put in front of the jury. This didn't factor into their decision. So,
well, there's multiple issues about this, because actually we were gaslit as a public. We were misinformed. And I think that if the true information about Mr. Kaba's background had come out in the early days, it would have dramatically reduced the tensions and anxieties amongst Londoners, the crisis of confidence in our police officers. And so that's a serious question that I think... there are serious questions to come out of it. No, actually, it doesn't necessarily mean it's right, OK? You've got to continuously improve. What we've seen, actually, is that... and the other point is that there's a serious question for both the Independent Office of Police Conduct and also for the Crown Prosecution Service. They recommended that this serving police officer making a split-second judgment should be charged with murder, when actually, when you look at the evidence that we've now got ahead of us, he was making a split-second judgment on the basis that he knew that car had been used in a firearms incident the night before. And the jury looked at the same evidence and threw it out in less than 3 hours. And I think the competence and fitness for purpose of those two organisations now needs to be questioned, because that officer... his life has been, frankly, ruined for 2 years. And the whole of the armed officers in the Met Police, I mean, they're literally down tools in a crisis of confidence. So there are serious questions to be asked. It's not good enough. We've got to improve.
We should say, though, that he didn't know, the firearms officer didn't know about Chris Kaba's background story when...
No, but they did know that they knew this was a very dangerous situation. They knew that car the night before had been used in a firearms incident.
Jim, what did you make of all this yesterday?
My view is, sitting in a TV studio, it's quite easy for myself and others to opine about it. What I do know is that the jury sat and listened to the evidence, and they themselves discussed it for 3 hours and came to a very clear conclusion, which is that the firearms officer shouldn't be found guilty of murder. Of course, there are questions about how the case gets to this situation, and of course, there's got to be an astonishing amount of respect for the men and women who do this job. I couldn't do it, not because of an issue of judgment, not just that, there's an issue of bravery. They put their life on the line, in a literal sense, probably every day. So there are big questions, but I don't think we should use this individual case to shake up the entire justice system. The police officers involved didn't know the individual in this car had carried out a heinous shooting the night before. And the jury didn't know Mr. Kaba's background when they found the police officer innocent of all charges. So I think it's important just not to be furious about this, to learn the lessons and then look at reforms.
Yeah, we have got to learn the lessons, we have got to look at reforms, and we have got to look at the public interest and confidence. It's an important balance. The police have to have the confidence of the population.
Do you think there should be different rules for police?
Actually, do you know, I think this is one of the lessons we need to look at from this. I think there should. I think there is, the police officers are making split-second decisions, and until a couple of years ago, they could apply a principle of what's called honestly held belief. And that was rejected by the Supreme Court a couple of years ago in the Jermaine Baker case. And I think that has had a very negative impact, and I think that now needs to be re-looked at.
And it is about getting the balance right, because no one surely can ever want a system that we have in some other countries, where there's endless high-profile cases of police officers, certainly in America, for example, going regularly through the judicial system simply because...
It's quite rare, though, in this...
It's very rare, and I think it's something to celebrate in this country, that it's so rare that these sorts of dilemmas arise. But I think in the coolness and the cool light of day, I think there are really substantial lessons to learn from this.
There really are.
Thank you both. We will come back to you. Coming up next in the Politics Hub. British Egyptian Alaa Abdel Fattah is languishing in an Egyptian jail for sharing a Facebook post about torture in the country. His mother, Layla Sweif, is on hunger strike and is calling for the British government to secure his release. She joins me live shortly. Leila Swef hasn't eaten for 3 weeks. She's on hunger strike in protest for the continued imprisonment of her son, Allah Abdel Fattah, who is languishing in an Egyptian jail. Allah, who is a British citizen, finished a 5-year sentence in September. He was jailed for sharing a post on Facebook about torture in Egypt, but he's not been released. His family say that he should never have been in prison at all. Despite having British citizenship, Egypt has never allowed him a consular visit. David Lowy, as Shadow Foreign Secretary, called for serious diplomatic consequences if access wasn't granted immediately and he wasn't freed. Mr. Lowy is now, of course, in government, and Leila is calling for him to secure her son's release. Well, she joins me now, I'm pleased to say. Thank you so much for coming in. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And first, how are you? You've been on hunger strike for nearly a month.
Yes. Well, I'm all right for now. None of the dire consequences of hunger strikes has started, so I don't feel too bad. But when you go on hunger strike, you're all right for. It depends on your body, but you can be all right for 20 days, 30 days, maybe even 40 days. But after that, you get into... Once you've started burning muscles instead of extra fat, you get pains. You could have irreversible damage to some organs. None of this has started for me yet.
How long are you going to carry on?
I'm going to carry on until Allah is released or until I'm carried into hospital in a state of complete collapse. I'm not going to stop. I can't stop. It's been 5 years, and now, he should never have been in prison in the first place, and it's been 5 years, and I can't go on like this. I can't go on like this. He can't go on like this, and I can't go on like this.
So you're willing to wait until you're taken into hospital if nothing happens? What if nothing
happens? I'm willing to die. I would rather not. I would not get there. I don't want to. For the sake of my children, at least, I don't want Alaa to live with the knowledge that I died to get him out of prison. It's not the happiest legacy to leave your children. But I'm not bluffing. I'm willing to die, and this has to happen. He has to get out of prison.
Do you feel like you're being listened to? How do you feel about
I hope
the government's response?
They're listening, but they're not doing anything. I mean, they're talking to me nicely. They're listening. But I had, with the previous government, I had 2 years of people listening and talking to me nicely, and nothing happened. I was hoping that this government would be different. So far, it hasn't proved different.
Are you quite disappointed from what you've heard from David Lammy? Haven't heard?
No, I'm disappointed. I mean, he's met my daughters. He hasn't met me, but he's met my daughters. And we're back to stuff like, we have to build a relationship. We haven't yet. We can't. You have to have a relationship. England, the Egyptian and the British government are allies. England is a very big trade partner of Egypt. British tourists are a very good source of income to Egypt. You have a relationship. And you're friends. You're not enemy. This is not Iran. You can ask for favors. You can use leverage. You can approach this in any way you like. Say to the Egyptians, this crazy lady who's in hunger strike is bugging us, and get her off our backs. Do something.
I should say the Foreign Office have released a statement. They said that their priority remains consular access. and that they continue to raise the case at the highest levels of the Egyptian government. I guess what I also want to ask you, you've talked a bit about the physical toll. What's been the emotional toll on you the last 5 years without your son?
Your whole life. I mean, okay, I go through the motions. I work. I do good stuff. I'm fine. I've had some nice things happen to me. My daughter has had a baby, but everything is there's a sorrow behind all this. Everything that happens, you are thinking, if Allah was here, we'd be doing this together. You take out his son, if Allah was here, we'd be doing this together. You're happy about something, you're thinking, hell, Allah isn't here. He himself is, well, Allah is feeling hopeless, actually. I mean, he's entertaining himself on a daily basis. He's keeping a grip on himself for our sakes, but he's feeling hopeless. If you try to talk to him about the future, he doesn't engage at all. He keeps saying things like, you'd better just plan for Khalid as if he's an orphan. That's Khalid, that's his son. So it's tough. It's tough.
Why do you think the government hasn't done more?
I don't know. I've stopped second-guessing governments. Governments always have big plans, and I don't see why they haven't done more. I really don't see. I mean, okay, the previous government was always a government that's not going to stay there long. So I suppose I understood this a bit. I mean, I understood that the Egyptians' reaction to whatever was said to them was that, you just have to wait them out and then they'll be out of government and we can see what happens then. But this government is a new government that's here to stay for 5 years. They have leverage. They should do more.
Okay, thank you so much. I wish we could talk to you. I'm sure we will talk to you again, but thank you for coming in. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Still to come on the Politics Hub. The budget is almost upon us and we're a serious political programme. So after the break, we're going to be talking about Rachel Reeves's hair. I'm afraid she may have dyed it again. Yes, I know. Well, we are looking at whether press reports of a possible hairstyle U-turn trivialise politics and the women and men in high office.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock, an exclusive interview with Bianca Gascoigne, who has told me that she was groomed and sexually assaulted by Mohammed Al-Fayed. Bianca worked at Harrods as a teenager. She says shame and embarrassment has stopped her from speaking out until now. But she has broken her silence and is telling her story for the very first time. That's coming up at 8 on the UK Tonight.
And now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat is seriously overcrowded.
This is one of the most severe viruses in the world.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
The biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it. It got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits going in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round. This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world. Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa!
Close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic. Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live. I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Now to the budget, and tight public finances mean tough tax choices facing the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. She's responsible, of course, for an economy worth over £2 trillion. Her decisions affect the lives of tens of millions of people. So today, the papers are full of feverish speculation about whether the Chancellor has changed her hair. Well, here on the Politics Hub, we're all about keeping up appearances, so we thought we'd have a look at some other political makeovers. She's not the first, I should say. Another well-known former Chancellor, there he is, George Osborne, similarly caused a bit of a stir when he was in the role, with people at the time saying he'd changed up his hair. Spot the difference? I'm not sure I can see it. And Rishi Sunak had a mini makeover. I think you'll remember this one, when he was Chancellor after being pictured preparing for a spending review in a hoodie and, of course, a tie underneath. And lastly, even the Prime Minister, there he is, had a bit of a change up. He seems to be rarely seen without his pair of trendy specs. Have caused him a few problems, we should mention, more recently. Right, let's bring our duo back in, shall we? I can't quite believe we're talking about this. I mean, do you think Rachel Reeves' hair has been overhyped? Is this targeted at women, do you think? I mean, we spoke about some men there.
I'm trying hard to work up interest in this story. The one on the right, or was it the one on the left? I can't remember. Just looked like it had been windy. And the one on the left looked so she'd recently been to the hairdressers. I think the political makeover, so I don't think this is a political makeover, I just think it's someone going to the hairdressers, and I'm assuming that's not a problem for the Chancellor to do. But there are, sometimes political makeovers genuinely do make a difference. Yeah. Mrs Thatcher famously changed her voice. If you listen to early recordings of Mrs Thatcher to the later recordings, you wouldn't completely recognise it as the same person. The Labour Party completely metamorphosised into New Labour in the mid-90s.
Gordon Brown had a bit of a makeover, didn't he?
He did. So but Gordon was asked what did he spoke about he liked listening to the Arctic Monkeys on his iPod. Now, no one believed Gordon knew who the Arctic Monkeys were or whether he had an iPod. So these things, and Gordon is many things, but an Arctic Monkeys fan on his iPod isn't one of them.
I fear there is a bit of a slight sort of women thing to the sort of the interest. Because actually the much greater makeover recently has been Robert Jenrick. I mean, if you look at pictures of him 2 years ago to now, you barely recognise the same person.
And he's very publicly
and he's very public about that, and he's and that's fine. But I mean, there's been very little comment about that, as opposed to Rachel Reeves. She's had a couple of hairdressers and tried a new hairdresser. I mean, frankly, so what? And also, you never quite know what's real with photoshopping and filters and things. You think, OK, who's slightly sort of overdone it just to make a point?
Yeah, and I think the Robert Jenrick makeover I'm more interested in is the metamorphosis in his politics, not his weight. I mean, he's gone from being as far as I could understand, a mainstream moderate Remainer to the most right-wing Conservative candidate in the
he's realised he was in the wrong and he needs to come with us because we're in the right at reform, you see.
On weight loss or on politics?
He has been on a bit of a political journey.
He certainly has.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we managed to sneak in a bit on the Tories because they seem to have been a bit absent in our programmes recently. But unfortunately, I don't think we have got enough time. But very quickly, which of the two would you pick, Kemi or Rob?
Badenoch will win. But it doesn't matter because neither of them will ever be Prime Minister.
That's the real point. Neither of them will be leading into the next
election.
election.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you both so much. Coming up, the UK Tonight with Sarah Jane Mee.